I would argue that menstruation should not be difficult or painful or distressing in any way. They should just come and go.
If something is common doesn't mean it's normal. I chatted to my mom and all of my girlfriends were in like mid-30s. 80% of them have hormonal issues, if not more. It's either PCOS or endometriosis or no period at all, or hot flashes at night and super early perimenopause.
My observation is there are more period-related problems now. PCOS is definitely increasing quite dramatically. It seems to be amplifying every generation. Like, this is tracking along with, in general health, like metabolic problems like insulin resistance is becoming a lot more common than it was 25, 30 years ago.
I always find it super interesting when I see fitness experts that share their diet and workout regimen. Oh, and by the way, I haven't had period in 10 years, but this is how you should eat as well.
I call our period our monthly report card. It's just a very handy little check-in with health. And we're not just talking about the bleed. A menstrual cycle is essentially by definition a cycle in which ovulation was the main event, which of course means that the withdrawal bleeds we get on oral contraceptive pills are not menstrual cycles. You cannot regulate the menstrual cycle with the pill.
The one that I feel the most passionate about is the fact that it switches off our ovulation altogether, so we never really ovulate.
Ovulation is the main event of the menstrual cycle.
It seems like everyone has some sort of level of hormonal issues. Actually, you tell me, why is that?
Hi, my name is Aggie and this is Biohacking Bestie. The one-stop shop for a modern queen, where you can find biohacking courses, self-growth courses, and where you can find the most incredible community of women so you can hit all of your biohacking goals and beyond.
Guys, welcome to Biohacking Bestie. And today on a podcast, I have someone that I have been admiring for such a long time. And I feel like I want to amplify the mission of, because your mission is so important, Dr. Lara Briden. Thank you so much for being the guest on the podcast, and thank you for everything that you do. And I think we have a very similar mission to help women fall in love with their cycle, their hormones, and celebrate them instead of feeling like it's a curse. It's a superpower. Yeah. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. So, the typical usual question, how does one start to get on the journey of helping women celebrate their bodies? Because I know we often don't get, it's not exactly what you get taught in school.
Right. Well, I think it's what you just said. Our hormones are our superpower rather than being a liability. And my background is evolutionary biology. So I also come at it through the lens of just acknowledging that female is arguably, the default normal version of physiology. I like to characterize male as the quirky variant, but we're female, so we're cyclic beings. And yeah, that's a key part about how our body works. It's I think it's better to just work with it and stop fighting it. Yeah.
So in your journey, like if we can just zoom out and kind of start your personal journey with your period and your relationship with it and how it has changed or is changing over the course of everything that you're doing and serving women.
That's an interesting question. My periods throughout my life, my periods have stopped now. I'm into menopause, so that's a whole other part of the journey, which is also a good part of the journey. Yeah. My periods personally were not too bad. They were pretty straightforward. I never took hormonal birth control because I was a naturopathic doctor, basically. And even as a younger woman, I always just used condoms and never really occurred to me to go on hormonal birth control. But a lot of my knowledge about menstrual health and knowledge about all the different ways menstruation can be difficult, of course, came from my patients, from 25 years of working with women on the ground, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, just trying to find solutions for period problems solutions other than hormonal birth control. And fortunately, as you can imagine, the body responds really, really well, actually. So periods, I set the bar quite high. I would argue that menstruation should not be difficult or painful or distressing in any way. It's usually possible to achieve symptomless menstrual cycles. So no significant premenstrual symptoms, no significant pain, no heavy bleeding. They should just kind of come and go. And
Yeah.
I think that's possible for a lot of women.
And I think this is really important. So if you're listening to this, and my listeners are usually women, and it's this idea, and I don't know if you know the work of Dr. Gabor Mate, the myth of normal, and this
Yes.
idea that if
Yes.
something is common doesn't mean it's normal. And we have normalized painful periods, PMSing, feeling like we want to kill our partner before a period, and eat a tub of ice cream, and feeling all out of control, like different personality. And I know from my journey, I definitely feel the difference on a month where I'm not really following my protocol of how to keep my hormones healthy, of like, oh wow, this sucks. Like, I can't imagine that women go through it every month, and there's so many things we can do, which I love that you say that. So maybe from the beginning, how has your work changed from 25 years ago to what is it right now? Because I have a feeling you might be getting busier and busier in your practice.
Well, I can speak. Yeah. Well, I mean, I can only have the time to see a few patients these days. I'm mostly writing. I've got a third book coming out, but I still love my work with patients. I do still see people face to face. I have consulting rooms in Christchurch, New Zealand. But I guess I might comment on over the 25 years, kind of what's happened in women's health and the natural health space more generally, because it has been quite
I'm
the
super
journey.
curious, like how it has evolved, right? And
so 25 years ago when I started practicing in 1997. I graduated as a naturopathic doctor that year and just dove straight into general practice in a small town in Canada. So I was treating people of all shapes and sizes and both sexes, and but a lot of them were women who were coming to me, and there wasn't a lot of back at that time, critiquing hormonal birth control was a lot more unusual. I think here we are in 2024. It's pretty common actually for a lot of people to be speaking out against the pill or raising some of the issues around that. Back then, that was a time of high dose hormone therapy for menopause and lots of surgeries. And just to give you an example, just to situate it. So with polycystic ovary syndrome, which I'm sure you've probably talked about maybe on your podcast or have listeners who are aware of that. Back in 1997, 98, it was a brand new idea, like a completely new idea that it could be linked to blood sugar or insulin balance or anything like that. That had just come onto the radar.
And now it's like diabetes of the ovaries.
I know. So, and also just things like there's a quote in my first book, Period Repair Manual, back in the 90s, some of the local doctors that were working in the town where I was and interacting with my patients, they had never heard of probiotics. That was like the weirdest thing for them. They're like, good bacteria, what a strange idea. So, a lot of things obviously have changed since then. I think it's kind of if amusing is the right word, like it's gratifying, I guess, and good that like a lot of the things that back in 25 years ago, only naturopathic doctors were talking about is now, quite a common conversation across lots of different
and people
professions and people doing different kinds of work. Yeah.
Sorry. And you were definitely like at the forefront. That's why I was just curious to see as you had this, backseat, and I was like, oh, is this what's happening right now? I'm so happy that you were probably super niche to now being like, okay, guys, I've been talking about it for 25 years, but thanks for finally listening. Right. Which is so beautiful. Go ahead.
Yeah. I don't keep going. It's fun. Actually, I don't have many interviewers ask me about that side of things. But yeah, it's interesting that you're curious in the history of it and what was happening in the 90s. Because for me, it's
like I chatted to my mom, and when I think across my girlfriend, all of my girlfriends were in like mid 30s. 80% of them have hormonal issues, if not more. It's either PCOS or endometriosis or no period at all, or hot flashes at night and super early perimenopause. And I'm thinking like, so I call mom. I'm like, Mom, like, was that like same when, in the 80s when I was being born? And she's like, no, it was super like an anomaly to have someone who didn't miss their period, or fertility wasn't as common. But she said like, oh, now it seems like everyone has some sort of level of hormonal issues, obviously through it. Actually, you tell me, why is that?
Yeah, no, you're right. There's a trend to, I would say my observation is it's more common to have period related problems now, but PCOS is definitely increasing quite dramatically. It seems to be amplifying every generation. There's reasons for that. We can talk about that. Endometriosis also, and pain does seem to be more common. I think, there's going to be different factors. I think this is tracking along with, in general health, like metabolic problems like insulin resistance is becoming a lot more common than it was 25, 30 years ago. Also, there's a lot of changes with immune system and microbiome. And I think some of that is, going to be from the food supply and antibiotic exposure, especially, as infants and young child antibiotic exposure. I think that's creating a change, and that will show up in periods, because one of my key messages that is in Period Repair Manual, my first book, menstrual health is not separate from general health. So, I talk about in that book, fix your health and you'll fix your period. So there is a strong connection. So the fact that we're seeing this uptick in menstrual problems is, I would say, parallel to an uptick in health problems generally, like an uptick in IBS and an uptick in allergies and things like that. So periods are going along with that.
And period is your fifth vital sign. So it's such a gift for us as women to know that the moment period is off, it's like, oh, I am not healthy. It's not like, oh, whatever. And so like for me personally, I always find it super interesting when I see fitness experts that, share their diet and workout regimen. Oh, and by the way, I haven't had period in 10 years, but this is how you should eat as well. And I'm like, I would not take advice from you. I'm sorry. But like, if you haven't had your period in 10 years, probably your diet you might look good, but your diet probably isn't super healthy. And that's a little bit scary that the looks feels like as long as someone is skinny, we think they're healthy, but skinny doesn't equal healthy. And
of course. Yeah.
Right. And so there's this whole idea. It's like, sorry, my dog is making sounds when he's sleeping.
I can't hear. No, I can't hear.
Have to cut it out. And so that has been a very brand new idea for me back in the day to show me your period and I'll tell you how healthy you are. Right. And it's like your whole menstrual cycle. So for all my listeners, women, if you're listening to this, the chances are it's going to be really hard for you to find someone who will take your period seriously to the point that, will say, hey, PMS is not normal. I remember my best friend going through so many painful periods, going to a doctor. It's like, periods meant to be painful for some women, only to realize she had endometriosis for years and years and years. That was misdiagnosed. So let's talk about PCOS and endometriosis. If not to self-diagnose, but what can we recognize about our period that is a good indication something's off, and then what we can do about it?
Yeah, we'll talk about them one at a time because they're quite different conditions. I'll respond to what you were saying about the period, just again, as menstrual health as an expression of general health. In Period Repair Manual, I call our period our monthly report card. It's just a very handy little, a check-in with health. And especially now, this many decades into practice, when I do occasionally have a male patient, I just have this gap. I'm like, oh, wait, of course I can't ask about periods. So I'm missing this, sort of diagnostic lens that can be quite helpful for women. So the starting place, periods, and I guess I'll just define what a period is. So I think this is maybe a good starting place. A menstrual cycle. By period, we're not just talking about the bleed. Actually, the bleed is only just sort of one part of it, the inevitable result of the hormonal events that define a menstrual cycle. So a menstrual cycle is essentially by definition a cycle in which ovulation was the main event, which of course means that the withdrawal bleeds we get on oral contraceptive pills are not menstrual cycles. That's a very important thing. And that does seem to be a message that's finally getting through to everyone, maybe even to doctors, that, you cannot regulate the menstrual cycle with the pill because they're not menstrual cycles. The pill just switches off ovarian function, basically kind of puts the ovaries in a temporary menopausal state almost. And so can mask menstrual symptoms, but doesn't do anything to correct them. So the starting place would be Yeah.
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 Also, like, I think the biggest one, the one that I feel the most passionate about, is the fact that it switches off our ovulation altogether. So we
Yeah.
never fully ovulate. So before we maybe even go that, could you explain the benefits of ovulation? Because I think this is really telling for people, because you not only have no period or, no bleed,
Yeah.
you also have no ovulation on the pill.
Well, that's the main thing you don't have. Yeah. So the ovulation, like I said, ovulation is the main event of the menstrual cycle. Ovulation is important not just to make a baby, but for general health, because ovulation is how we make hormones. So men make their testosterone daily. We make our estrogen and progesterone in a monthly pattern. And the only way we can do that is if we progress, make a lot of estrogen on the progression, the way to ovulation, and then we actually ovulate, and then we form a temporary gland in the ovary that makes progesterone. And that is the only way to get progesterone. There's no progesterone in any type of hormonal birth control. Those are all progestins, which actually have quite different effects in lots of different tissues, including the brain and the breasts and cardiovascular system. So progesterone, our own progesterone that we make is beneficial. So is estrogen, of course, for brain health, for bone health, for immune system, for heart and cardiovascular system, for mood, for breast health. Progesterone in particular probably reduces the risk of breast cancer over a lifetime. It's a bit of debate about that, but I'm in the camp that thinks it probably reduces the risk. So progesterone probably reduces the risk of breast cancer, whereas progestins, just as a fine point of detail, all progestins probably slightly increase the risk of breast cancer. So that just illustrates the difference between real hormones that we make with ovulation and the progestins that we take as hormonal birth control. So in that sense, a lifetime, over the 3 to 4 decades that we will have periods, that's a really important dose of hormones that we get every month, and or in a huge amount if during pregnancy, because pregnancy also, provides the body. It obviously builds a baby, but it also provides the body with that exposure to those beneficial hormones in quite high amounts, and all of that can build what's called metabolic reserve, which means it's building bone mass, it's optimizing heart health and brain health, so that even once we reach menopause and those hormones reduce, we still have that good tissue quality or metabolic reserve to get us through.
Plus, ovulation also there are studies that makes you just more radiant, more beautiful, more attractive. Yeah. More attractive. So I feel there's so many benefits, and I have never been informed about the benefits of ovulation, except for the one to make babies or to be fertile. It was almost like, you don't, on the pill, you just won't be fertile. But no one said, ovulation is not just things that make you fertile, it also strengthens your bones, supports your metabolism, insulin sensitivity, you're more attractive. Like, none of this was ever mentioned to me, which is a bummer, right? Because it's like we women were put in this very misinformed environment, right? Where it hasn't been communicated all the, the fine print of what happens when you're not ovulating.
Think about it. Think about an analogy with men. Imagine if we said to men, you only need testicular function and testosterone are only to make a baby. So if you're not ready for making a baby, then we're just going to switch that all off. We'll switch off your testosterone and we'll replace it with this, contraceptive or this drug version of testosterone that's not really testosterone. It's kind of more like estrogen in some ways, and you're going to obviously have lots of side effects from that and not have the benefits of your own testosterone, but that's what we do. Like, that's essentially what we say to women. So we need our own estrogen and progesterone the same way men need their testosterone. And to be clear, we make a little bit of testosterone as well, and men make a little bit of estrogen as well. So it's
funny, but from a biological point of view, it would be safer for men actually to go through the reversible procedure of tying their testicles, right? Versus a woman being on a 30-year hormonal birth control.
Right. So actually, it's interesting you bring up vasectomy. So you're talking about vasectomy, which is, Now, so that's obviously a permanent form of, it sometimes is reversible, but it's generally considered.
A few friends that just did it for 5 years or 6 years and they went back.
Yeah. Well, actually, and it's funny you'd mention this because on the radar, like soon, I talk about it in Period of Perimenopause, and I keep saying, oh, it's coming soon, but it's finally being clinically trialed in Australia, actually, a version of what's called a vasocclusive method. So it's like, it is a reversible vasectomy. In the new method, they don't cut the vas deferens. They just put a gel in there to prevent the sperm from entering the semen. So it potentially could be a game changer in terms of options for avoiding pregnancy. But you're very right. Like, just to point out, men are fertile every day, whereas women are fertile. Technically, we're only fertile 1 day per cycle, but it works out to about 6 days per cycle because sperm lives for 5 days. Yeah. So that kind of adds to the window. But yet it's women who have been expected to switch off their entire hormonal system to avoid 1 day of fertility per month. And to be clear, vasectomy or the new reversible version of vasectomy does not affect men's hormones. So all it does is prevent the sperm from entering the semen. So it should
just
have
like
no
when you look
side
at the
effects.
benefits, and like women actually die from birth control versus the worst thing that can happen with vasectomy, you might be infertile, which is also a side effect of birth control, like prolonged birth control. So it's like so funny that like it's so commonly, birth control is so common comparing to vasectomy that like I'm like just annoyed that it has
Well, they're also male condoms. Condoms are, so as I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, I feel like when I was a teenager in the 80s, condoms were more common. I don't know. I mean, I sort of maybe need to do a more formal survey of young people today, but certainly my young patients seem to have this idea that condoms don't work, or that even worse, that men don't want to wear them. Whenever they tell me their partners don't want to wear them, I just feel like too bad. That's what men have to do if they want to have sex.
That's literally what it is. So the girlfriends I'm in a long-term relationship, so it's not applicable for me. But a lot of times it's just like guys are like, oh, I just really don't like it. I'm like, yeah, no shit. But also you want to sleep with someone. Yeah.
That just feels, I mean.
Yeah. So that's I feel like we're on the same page, and there's a part of me that is just like I want to like bring that voice to the table that like, hey, if you just had 2 kids with your wife and you both in your 30s and you're not planning on having more kids, she should not go on birth control. If like time for vasectomy or some sort of procedure that can like support your woman, right?
Mm-hmm. I'll just say one more thing about condoms too. I'm such a fan of condoms, and just for what it's worth, because everyone's like, oh, they break, they fail. I mean, if they're used properly, if you get a condom that fits, because penises come in different sizes, importantly, so get the right size, and it's less likely to break or fall off or anything like that. But in the unlikely event of a condom, there is, well, depending on where you are in the world, obviously, but I would argue for easy access to the morning after pill or Plan B or whatever it's called in different parts of the world. Because just to point out, that method, Plan B, is really just a big dose of a contraceptive pill. It works by preventing ovulation. So it works in the same way as the pill, but you only take it maybe never, or maybe, once every 3 years. Yeah. And it's quite a different thing than taking the same drug daily. So that combo of condoms plus access to morning after pill, I feel like is a very powerful, kind of reassuring way to avoid pregnancy for anyone who's listening to this and just feels like they need something super reliable. I mean, there's also the male method. I'll just launch into like a little bit of other methods of avoiding pregnancy. There's also
because by the way, so in long-term relationship doesn't mean that you have to use a condom every single time. Just use it around your ovulation until you really, really nail it. I have Oura rings, so I know exactly where my ovulation is. For me, it's a question of like 3 days now, just to be safe, because I already know.
Well, that's so what you just described there. Fertility awareness-based methods are a possibility for avoiding pregnancy. It really can work. You do need to either be using, well, do you mind saying what you combine your Oura ring with? Like, what app are you using? Because I mean, we can just talk about, there's a few different approved algorithms that are approved for avoiding pregnancy.
I
And
used
then, or you could
originally I used natural cycles, and then we actually my
Yeah.
team of researchers have been actually using. We're working on the app ourselves as well that would be able
Oh,
to pick up not only that, but the thing that we're working on the most is actually will link with a male app, so the guy will get a notification of what's going on in the female body and how to support her during this time. Because I feel like men, again, I sound like a man hater, but I'm not. But I just feel like if men took like a second to educate themselves about their partner's cycle for a little bit, they would come with so much more understanding, grace, and they would be able how to support it. But it feels like in my past relationships, it was like, oh, it's her period. It doesn't, it affects me only because she's fertile, instead of like, what's ovulation? Like, how does it, how does it feel in your body? Like, what's happening? What is estrogen?
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't that be beautiful if men were like slightly a little bit more aware?
Well, that's actually, and some research has borne that out. So couples who are using fertility awareness-based methods for either avoiding pregnancy or achieving pregnancy, or even as you're kind of describing, just for general health, it does seem to be quite beneficial for the relationship in general. And of course, it's going to depend on the guy, I guess, and the nature of the relationship. But overall, yes. I mean, I think that can be quite a good thing, just to have that information about sort of what's happening at different, because we are cyclic beings. I mean, I said at the beginning that we shouldn't really have distressing or strong symptoms with the different phases of our menstrual cycle, but we can feel differently at the different times. And that's, I think, something we can embrace. And
I love it, actually.
Yeah.
It makes me feel like I don't have to always go. And there's a time for me to just like slow down and just be, where the best ideas come to life, which is something I had to learn and embrace, because I was, we live in this brainwash where you have to produce constantly, you have to be productive. And when you feel like, oh, I don't really want to go out, it makes you feel like maybe there's something wrong with you. Right,
exactly. Yeah. So, assuming that we should be the same every day, rather than just recognizing that it's during the luteal phase, or this, the 2 weeks leading up to the period, it is natural to feel a little bit more introverted. And that's not a bad thing, because I'm a strong introvert. So I think introversion is not necessarily a bad thing. And it's natural. Another example is it's natural to feel hungrier in the second half of the cycle. It's 100% normal. So we don't have to, fight that or feel guilty. I think the solution to that natural increase in hunger is actually just to honor it with lots of, preferably kind of high protein, healthy, satisfying, like filling foods, but, and therefore shelter from, sugar and junk food during that time. I think by filling up on the other food, women can just naturally not require junk food. This whole knowing if and when you ovulate, and how that all feels, that's another word that gets used for that, is called body literacy, which I really do love that term. And just to give you, because I know you're interested in the history of things, so I'll just name drop here. There's she's a friend of mine, actually, from the same part of the world, Calgary, Canada. Laura Werschler coined the term body literacy back in like the 80s. So her group had it was monthly or weekly, maybe a monthly, like paper newsletter about body literacy and fertility awareness back then. Like, so people would have got that in their post office box, and like a little kind of like a little, and all talking about, alternatives to hormonal birth control and tracking your cycle and charting. And so, that's a full generation ago, but I just love that. And I've seen some of her old newsletters from that time. It's just really fun to think about.
Wow.
The history of some of this. Yeah.
All right, so let's go back to PCOS, because I think this is super important for everyone listening.
Yeah.
So how do I know that there's a chance that I might have PCOS that's undiagnosed?
Yeah, it's a good question, because PCOS is often misdiagnosed. So it's both overdiagnosed, we can talk about that, and it is underdiagnosed to some extent. So the overdiagnosis, just laughing at your dog.
I'm usually not home by myself as well, so it's a little easier, but when I am, he gets very protective. My fiance is traveling, so.
So the main thing, so by definition, PCOS, or polycystic ovary syndrome, is excess androgens. So, and a too high level of testosterone or other male type hormones in a female body. And that is essentially what the condition is. It's that situation of high male hormones when other explanations for that have been ruled out, because there's other reasons for high male hormones. So those need to be excluded as part of the diagnostic process. And it can either be diagnosed based on measurably high levels of testosterone on blood tests, or importantly, just as symptoms. So the symptoms would be strong jawline acne, facial hair, potentially hair loss, and the classic weight gain around the middle, which is very strongly tied with testosterone. Usually it'll also go along with a suppressed ovulation. So ovulation that's not happening regularly or at all. Now, the confusing thing is, and as I've talked about in my work, is there's different types of PCOS. All actually sorts of random different things get lumped under the same diagnostic umbrella as PCOS. So you can actually have women who have regular cycles but still have high androgens, potentially from the adrenal glands. That's actually, it's still classically called PCOS, but it's sort of a slightly different situation and requires different treatments, which is why I've always been so adamant with my own patients and in my own writing to try to identify what I call the type or the functional type of PCOS. But where the overdiagnosis problem comes in is that traditionally, when the condition was described, it was observed that on ultrasound, or even before ultrasound, actually, just, on surgery or other methods of imaging the ovaries, they could see that the ovaries looked different in that there wasn't what's called a dominant follicle. So normally, as the ovaries are progressing to ovulation every month, one of the follicles or eggs will actually get quite big, like 2 centimeters, and will suppress all the other eggs that's from growing that cycle. So you'll have, depending on the age of the woman, you would classically have, depending on the magnification of the ultrasound, like six or seven smaller follicles whose growth was arrested, and then the one big dominant one. And that's kind of what an ovulatory or normal menstrual cycle should look like. So obviously, if ovulation's not happening, then you're not going to have that appearance, and you can have a lot more smaller eggs or follicles that weren't suppressed. They were just kind of just growing to a small size. That's the so-called polycystic appearance. Now, to be clear, they're not cysts exactly. They're not you can have a large ovarian cyst, and there's different kinds of that structure, kinds of ovarian cysts, which is an abnormal structure in the ovary, which is not what we're talking about with polycystic ovary. A lot of people are talking about changing the name because having the name cyst in the ovary has led to so much confusion. So as in a nutshell, I would say that although ultrasound is helpful for diagnosing certain things, including ovarian cysts, it is not at all helpful for diagnosing PCOS, the hormonal condition of PCOS. And one of the main reasons is that essentially anyone can have polycystic ovaries at any time. They know that, I forget what the stat is, at least 1 in 4. If you had a room full of women who are cycling normally and no symptoms and no PCOS, and you just did an ultrasound, about at least 1 in 4 of them would have polycystic ovaries. So it's picking up just, anyone really. And especially when it becomes more serious is if, someone, as you mentioned earlier, has lost their period to undereating, which is a common situation. She could have polycystic ovaries, but she doesn't have PCOS. She has hypothalamic amenorrhea, or relative energy deficiency. In sport would be the name given to that situation of irregular periods or no periods from underfueling. Likewise, someone could have endometriosis, have pain as their main symptom, and just happen coincidentally to also have polycystic ovaries, and then it's a lot of women being told they have PCOS based on this ultrasound finding is what I'm trying to say. And it's leading to a lot of confusion. So a takeaway would be
very different, right? So that's
a takeaway would be, if you've been diagnosed with PCOS based on an ultrasound, I would question everything. Basically, just kind of go back to the drawing board and think, the main question is, do you have androgen symptoms? Because that's what the condition is primarily,
which is basically hair loss, acne around your jawline, and weight gain around your hips and facial hair.
And facial hair. Yeah, facial hair and abnormal body hair. And even that is somewhat relative. I'll just put it, frame it. A little bit of hair on the upper lip is not necessarily PCOS either. It's sort of because genetically, some of us were more hairier than others, so there is some variability in that. And conversely, some women can truly have PCOS and actually quite high androgens, but not be showing a lot of androgen symptoms. So this is where it does get into a little bit, the diagnosis can be tricky.
Art, right? That's the art of being a doctor. Like, I think it's, that's why you go to a doctor and you don't treat yourself, but that's
try to
why
get a diagnosis.
Because it's like, it's really important because it's an art to navigate all of that. So obviously, just for someone to understand, like, oh shit, this is not normal, I perhaps should go see a doctor. And like, that is also something that we can treat and cure. And what would be the next step for that?
Well, I mean, I guess officially PCOS cannot be cured, but it can certainly be improved. And in my experience, depending on the exact nature of, the severity of the symptoms and what's been going on, it can be reversed to the extent that it's not really a thing. And also a lot of women we know this from the science, a lot of women can outgrow PCOS. So there's that as well. And then the other really temporary PCOS would be what I characterized as post-pill PCOS, which is anyone who's been on certain types of birth control, particularly Yasmin or any of the ones that really suppress androgens. When they come off, they can get a surge in androgens, like a post-pill acne, and periods take a while to come back. And that can be diagnosed as PCOS, but it's the kind of thing that after a couple of years will often just go away on its own.
What would you do in that situation where you're getting off the pill and you get an extra acne and this is not PCOS, what do I do to get rid of that?
And I talk about this in my books, and also I have a podcast episode called something like How to Treat Post-Pill Acne and Weight Gain. It's probably about kind of planning for it. So knowing that's coming, especially if it's happened before, and starting some treatments like zinc and maybe changing the diet before coming off the pill and just getting everything in place. And then, also knowing that it'll be temporary can really help as well. So very often with some of the treatments, that I talk about in my book, the post-pill acne will not be as bad as it has been the last time someone tried to come off the pill. And of course, because as women, we always blame ourselves. So I've had so many patients who get this horrible post-Yasmin, usually skin breakouts, and they're like, oh my, I must be broken. Like, I must be really messed up. And it's like, no, that's actually just a side effect of, the drug you were on, and now your body trying to adjust to not being on it. It's a withdrawal situation. Yeah. So a lot of women, if they at least know that, have to then feel they have a bit more control, and that they know there's going to be an ending to that. Yeah.
That's beautiful. What would you say is the difference between healing PCOS and reversing it to a point of it's no longer there? Because you were very careful with your words.
I know. Well, I mean, they're pretty similar. It's just that, how people they don't like, no one likes people sort of claiming there's a PCOS cure. So I guess just the word cure is, I don't think it's necessary, and certainly I would never say that's going to be guaranteed for everyone. But yes, for many people, it can be reversed to the point that you don't qualify for the diagnosis anymore. And that's pretty close to healing it completely. I know it's very
I mean, I believe, that we can get into like more philosophical part of it, because I do believe that you can reverse almost anything in your body, right? Like I'm a big believer in that. Otherwise, it makes me feel like we are completely out of control, but there are always instances of different conditions being healed.
We can reverse out of a lot of symptom pictures, for sure. I mean, some things, I don't want to downplay it. I mean, some people are born, or even some born with, or to some extent, have something set up quite early that is very challenging. I mean, we can talk a bit about endometriosis might be in that category. It's
because it's genetics, right?
Well, yeah. So endometriosis it's also a very enigmatic condition. It has a strong genetic component, I think primarily because it has a very strong immune system component. And so different people obviously genetically have different immune systems. So endometriosis does seem to run in families quite strongly. And it's also very much linked with the gut microbiome and intestinal permeability and issues like that. And there's also some diagnosis issues around endometriosis as well. So it is worth, we'll spend a few minutes talking about endometriosis. I would also refer people to, I have a podcast called Endometriosis is a Disease of Immune Dysfunction, where I kind of talk through some of the mechanisms a bit more. One of the reasons it's worth talking about endometriosis is because we were saying earlier that, the period is our monthly report card, and, usually the goalpost is, no pain or no symptoms or just perfect. And then I know there'll be people listening who have endometriosis who just are quite challenged by that kind of statement because they maybe already do have quite a healthy lifestyle, but still have a lot of pain. So there is something quite, physical going on with endometriosis. Those lesions can become quite inflamed and aggressive. In some cases, there's an argument for surgically removing them. There's the opinions on that vary quite a lot. I'm supportive of surgery sometimes for the condition. Certainly, a lot of my patients have had it, the surgical removal. But I'll just point out, it's also the lesions can go away on their own. They can. The immune system can clean them up to some extent or to a complete extent. So there's a way to certainly reduce the inflammation, reduce the pain. And if you can get close to pain-free, then again, that's another example of, reversing out of the symptom picture to the point where it doesn't really matter if you still qualify for that diagnosis.
Yeah.
Or
And
not.
so for those listening, feeling like, oh, I don't even know what that would even mean or feel or look like, what are some of the symptoms of endometriosis?
Yeah, well, the main symptom is pain. So the endometriosis is a condition where there's, not just, so painful period and pain between periods. Pain with sex. Pain with sex is a really classic one, although that can be caused by other things, obviously. So once again, the doctor has to try to diagnose it. With endometriosis, up until pretty recently, the only method of definitive diagnosis was with surgery, which again is a very challenging thing to, consider. That's changing a bit now. There's a few non-invasive testing methods that are on the horizon. They have not come to clinical practice yet. There's also kind of a growing awareness that certain types of ultrasound imaging can pick up certain types of endometriosis. And I'm careful to say it that way because, again, people can get kind of, concerned about the language around this. Just to be clear, just having had an ultrasound that is normal cannot rule out endometriosis. So that's important to say. But sometimes the more aggressive, what's called the deeper infiltrating lesions can be seen with the right kind of ultrasound imaging. So that's another approach to diagnosis. So, and just to clarify, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a condition where lesions form throughout the pelvis, usually on the outside of the uterus or the outside of the ovaries or kind of in other parts of the pelvis cavity, that are quite similar to the endometrial lining, not exactly the same though, which is quite important. That's different than normal uterine lining. And the important thing is about it that the lesions can become quite inflamed and full of a nerve supply. And so pain is the main symptom. The other symptom of endometriosis that most people are concerned about is it can cause infertility, for sure. Not always. Lots of women with endometriosis just become pregnant and seemingly with no problem. But certainly the amount of the inflammation associated with the condition seems to be impair fertility in a lot of women as well. And importantly, you can actually have impaired fertility from endometriosis even without pain. And that does start to make it quite tricky. That's kind of like the subclinical picture of endometriosis. So,
what is an endobelly?
That's bloating. And it's interesting because, in terms of it's sort of like abdominal or distension, it's quite common with the condition. And I think at least some of that bloating, at least through my lens, is coming from the digestive bloating associated. So there's endometriosis and irritable bowel syndrome or inflammatory bowel disease are quite closely related.
You mentioned
and it seems to be like
between the gut, right?
Yeah.
And so there could be also one of the symptoms on top of pain during intercourse, super painful periods, and then obviously like getting super bloated.
Yeah, digestive symptoms are one of the symptoms, arguably. I mean, the question is how much of it, to what degree are the digestive symptoms caused by the endometriosis, and to what degree is it the other direction with the gut dysbiosis and intestinal permeability driving or arguably causing endometriosis?
What do you think?
It's the second one.
Great question.
So that's what my video is about. You can put that in or my YouTube, my podcast YouTube episode called Endometriosis is a Disease of Immune Dysfunction. I talk about intestinal permeability in that and some of the research around that, suggesting, for example, that sounds bizarre, but that bacteria and bacterial fragments from the intestine can enter the pelvis and create a lot of inflammation associated with these lesions. It's a bacterial toxin called LPS, or lipopolysaccharide, that does seem to be quite involved in endometriosis. So the good thing is that by treating the gut, specifically by treating something called SIBO, I don't know if that's something that's ever come up on your podcast before.
Well, I've dealt with it for a few years, so I've been quite open about my journey as well. Okay,
right. So by treating irritable bowel syndrome or SIBO, or however, so whatever the diagnosis is, that can actually go a long way to improving endometriosis symptoms. So,
Dr. Gundry
endometriosis is not a hormonal condition, which is quite important. It's affected by hormones, for sure. It's strongly affected. The lesions are strongly affected by estrogen, but they're not caused by estrogen.
Oh, beautiful. Dr. Lara, so now that, we kind of know, okay, we already know what's common, what's not normal, where to look, how to find a doctor. What happens, I'm probably very aware of that women get into peri and menopause much sooner than back in the day, right? Apparently now some women get into perimenopause in their early 30s, and the doctors I have been speaking to, that the line is moving closer and closer. And is there anything we can do to delay it, if you will?
Right. Well, interesting. Okay, so my second book, Hormonal Perimenopause, is all about perimenopause. I have not been aware, although I'm open to what research might be out there to suggest that the age is getting younger. I don't know that that's true. I mean, it might be. There's quite a bit of variation. I'll just say the normal age for the period stopping, like the actual final period stopping, which is menopause, is anywhere between 45 and 55 is the normal age for that. Perimenopause, what you're talking about, is the kind of lead up to the final period, and that can be up to 10 years before. So it's technically is normal, and I would say has always been normal for perimenopausal symptoms to start by a woman's mid to late 30s, although some women, it'll be much later. And I think what's changed now is awareness, actually. I think people just didn't used to think about that in their 40s as to what that meant. There in the last 4 or 5 years specifically, there's been a huge surge in kind of awareness raising around perimenopause. To be fair, I mean, menopause, even now, menopause, period stopping before age 45 is abnormal. That's early menopause. I don't know if the frequency of that is increasing. It has been, depending on sort of the age, the frequency of that is only about 1 in 100 women. So most women will be at least their period stopping at least 45 or later.
Is there anything we can do to delay it?
Essentially, no. I mean, just a little bit of degree. I mean, all we know from the research is, for example, smoking can bring it a couple years earlier. Really poor health can affect it earlier, but amongst healthy people, there is still a 10-year range. So for what it's worth, and I always just do like to make these cases, I had a number of, patients and friends who were super healthy, super fit, 47-year-olds who entered, their period ended at that time, and it was nothing they had done wrong. So I think the women who keep cycling into their 50s and mid 50s, that's kind of quite a late menopause. That's genetic. To 95% of that is genetic, I would say. So in answer to your question, there's not really anything we can do naturally to delay the timing of menopause. There's a lot we can do to feel better during the transition process and stay healthy after the transition. And that's what Hormonal Perimenopause is about. So there's also quite a bit of variability. Like some women, I think in large part because of their general health, don't notice any symptoms with the transition. It's a natural life phase, to be clear. Perimenopause, menopause is not a disease. It's not a health condition. It's not a deficiency. We evolve to do it. And I build a case for that in Hormone Repair Manual. People used to, on average, die a lot younger just because they were dying in childhood and dying in childbirth and dying, of all sorts, all the many, many hazards that existed in previous times. But for those people who were lucky enough to survive all those hazards, people have always lived into their 70s and 80s, a few individuals. So it's normal for women to spend, the last 30 years of their life without periods. And arguably beneficial. Arguably beneficial for the species is kind of something called the grandmother theory of menopause. It suggests that it's quite interesting, actually, that a longer human lifespan for both sexes may have evolved or been selected for because post-reproductive women, older women specifically, are so useful to the family group that they're, having those long-lived genes in women means that all the descendants, everyone gets to survive better because the grandmothers are gathering all the food, looking after everyone and making sure everyone.
That's the best. What would you do? If someone's experiencing the first symptoms of perimenopause? Just a couple of things that we can do to make ourselves feel a little bit better.
Yeah, I'll give you the top three, basically. I have a whole book about this, Hormone Repair Manual, but the top three would be take magnesium and quit alcohol or seriously reduce it back. For some women, stopping alcohol is all they need to do. Like they'll be like, oh, my, hot flashes, my night sweats, my irritability, my breast pain, it's all gone now. That's can happen. And the third thing would be to move the body, because it's just perimenopause is the time, as I characterize it in Hormone Repair Manual, the brain is recalibrating or rewiring, just as it does at other times of change. So perimenopause is arguably second puberty. During first puberty, the brain is rewiring. It rewires again during pregnancy, during postpartum, during perimenopause. And the brain loves the body to move. So I just encourage women, whatever it is, the kind of movement that lights you up, whatever that is, like for me, it's walking and yoga, but for other people, it's, lifting heavy things or swimming or, rock climbing or dragon boating or just whatever they love to do. And getting outside can be really helpful too, because the circadian rhythm is also recalibrating during perimenopause. And so just getting that outdoor light, especially in the morning, can really help stabilize. And for some women, just those simple things it's all fine. Obviously in Hormone Repair Manual, then I talk about strategies for tougher situations and tougher cases. And there can be a place for hormone therapy. We'll have to maybe talk about that on a future podcast. We don't have sort of too much time to go into that now, but yeah, that's an option.
And so just to wrap things up, menopause. So what would you say is, because you shared earlier that this is the stage of the life that you're in, what is the most delicious thing about your menopause right now? Because we always talk about all the things that we want to do to avoid it, and it's like this scary thing, but what's the most beautiful thing about menopause?
There really is. It's not fictional. I can tell you it's real. This sense of just caring a lot less what people think. There's that tweet that I saw a couple of weeks ago. She's like, let's have a little more menopause in the world. It's just kind of, take no prisoners. Just, the phrase that often gets used is, profanities, maybe I won't say, but giving fewer F words about it's just it's quite real. And I remember my older patients telling me about it, and then you don't really understand till you get there, get here, that it's till you live it. It's just like, oh wow, why was I so? I don't know if it is all the estrogen or what it is about being a young woman, being so people pleasing and just needing to kind of
particular. I think that's the particular, and it has to be a certain way, and then everyone has to be a certain way. Otherwise, we're unhappy or stressed. Or I saw this meme that said, "No worries either way," which means for a woman, I'm worried both ways and a secret third way.
Good. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's not happening when you're on menopause. Oh, I love that. That's really nice, because I think it's just like this again. It's like, just like you said, it's not a disease. It's something that is coming anyways. And I think as we understand it and we see the benefits of it, there's nothing to be scared of.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. There's nothing to be frightened of. And the other thing to say is whatever symptoms, and they're usually neurological symptoms that someone might encounter during the transition, during perimenopause, they need to know that those are temporary. That most of the research suggests that you come out the other side and, mood is at least as good as it was when you were younger, and possibly better. I have this quote that I think it's in my book, and I've put it in a few presentations from the University of Melbourne, where they surveyed all these women, and they found that at least 70% of women in their late 50s, 60s report feeling pretty, quote, fantastic. So there is this kind of, in the Japanese term is, I forget the exact word, but it's like second spring or second life, or like there is a resurgence of energy that can happen after the beautiful, turbulent time of perimenopause. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. Dr. Lara, you said, where can people find you? Let's talk about that. Yeah. And what are you working on? And, what's exciting, what's coming up?
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks. So I'm easy to find. All my social media is at Laura Briden, and my blog is LaraBriden.com. I've got 2 books so far: Period Repair Manual for women of any age and Hormone Repair Manual for women over 40. And my 3rd book, which is coming at the end of May, is on metabolic health. I haven't announced the title yet, but it's coming soon. So it's all about metabolic health, as in insulin sensitivity and metabolic flexibility for women of any age, and the importance of that, and some of the strategies for achieving that or regaining that. Yeah.
Thank you for everything that you do, and thank you for your time. Thank you for being the guest. It means the world. Thank you, guys. Make sure you follow Dr. Lara. So much beautiful knowledge out there, and so many incredible videos. We will make sure you link all of them. Thank you.